Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 243. Before we get into our conversation, I wanted to take a minute to put in a plug for an upcoming event we're really excited about, and that is the Our Hearts Are Home Conference for Bereaved Parents. It's scheduled for April 25th and 26th in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it will be an amazing opportunity to hear some great speakers, many of whom have been guests on this podcast. They'll be addressing a wide variety of topics related to child loss, all from a sound biblical perspective. You can attend this event either in person or join us online, and it will be recorded so it can be watched later if you're already committed elsewhere that weekend. Brad and I will be there, and we would love to have the opportunity to meet you for the first time or get reconnected if we've met you previously. You can find all the information and register on their website at ourheartsaregehome.org/spring-conference, and I'll be putting that link in the show notes for you. The cost is very affordable, and if finances are tight right now, there are scholarships available. You will not want to miss this amazing opportunity. Now to the episode. Today I have the privilege of speaking with Erik and Susan Totera, who we met at one of our While We're Waiting weekends in Eastern Tennessee. They joined me to share the story of their daughter Reilly, a remarkable young woman who was blessed with creativity and an entrepreneurial spirit. And we discuss how their faith is carrying them through her sudden and unexpected death. Their journey is a testament to God's presence in times of deep sorrow and His promise of eternal life, and I believe you'll be blessed by listening in. Hi, Erik and Susan. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hello.
Hi, Jill.
It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Yeah, we so enjoyed meeting you at the retreat. I guess that's been a few months ago now. Time goes by quickly. But we just really enjoyed getting to know you. And I knew as soon as we visited that I wanted to have you come on as guests on the podcast. So I'm glad that you are willing to do that. Let's get started by giving you an opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourselves. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Well, we live in sunny Central Florida, and I can gloat over that a little bit because we are one of the few places that have not been freezing cold over the last couple weeks. But we live in a little, well, it's not so little anymore, a booming town called Winter Garden. I've lived here my entire life. Erik's lived here almost his entire life, and we attended church together. We went to high school together. So we've known each other a long, long time.
Yeah, it's are together many, many years before we actually were finally married. But we've known each other. Well, we're 53, going to be 54, and we've known each other since we were 14 years old. So it's and that has served us well in what we're talking about today, but just in general. It's been fun growing up together, literally, and now being married and living in the same town.
Yeah, I love that. What do y'all do there in Winter Garden?
Well, my professional background was in teaching and office management, but about 7 years ago, the Lord gave me the desire of my heart and let me be a stay-at-home mom. And I was able to homeschool my two youngest children through their high school years. I love to cook and can and bake and garden and all the old-fashioned, old-timey kind of things.
I work from home as a professional day trader, trading commodities, specifically currency. And so I find that very rewarding. And especially now with everything that's transpired, being with Susan every day at home. It's just a joy to be able to, get up early, get my work out of the done by the early afternoon, and then have time for whatever we need. But just, you know, if I were able to go back in time to my younger self and say, hey, guess what? You're going to be with your wife every single day of your life, and you are going to like it a lot. I would have just never believed it back then, but God has blessed us and allowed me to do that. So it's very flexible and very rewarding. So we are blessed.
Yes, you are blessed. That is a blessing for you guys to spend that much time together and really enjoy that opportunity to do that. So, we're here today to talk about your daughter Reilly and her story. But before we get into that, I'd really like for y'all to share a little bit of your personal testimony and also your history as a couple. You mentioned that you've known each other almost all your lives, but there's kind of a neat story behind that. So, talk about that.
Absolutely. I was born into a Christian family with a heritage of many generations who have served the Lord and honored him. I grew up in church. My dad was a lay minister. My mom was full-time on church staff. And I was 3 years old when I said the prayer and asked Jesus into my heart. And 6 years old, I got baptized and I thought I was good to go. And it wasn't honestly until about 5 years ago that the Lord really began to show me what it meant to live for him and to serve him and to honor him and to understand the importance of his word. And so looking back on that, I know he was preparing my heart for what was ahead. But as far as Erik,
Little different story. I was a Disney kid. I was born in California and brought to Windermere, Florida when I was 6 months old for the opening of Disney World. So I grew up in an artist home, and my dad grew up going to a strict Catholic school. So he was not a fan of Catholicism or really religion for that matter. My mother, and I'm an only child, my mom was spiritual in a hippie sort of way. So she knew that there was something out there, but always searching. So my mom, when I was probably 2, 3, and 4, is dabbling in new age stuff / occult stuff, just searching for things. And then thankfully, a good family friend who had moved also as an artist from California to Orlando for Disney World opening, introduced her to a church, Calvary Assembly in Winter Park, Florida, which was like 30 minutes from us. And my mother started going and got saved, which means I'm now going to church. My dad worked a lot, so he was gone a lot. So I'm now getting drugged to church, and I'm 6 years old. It took about a year of going to church, and finally I get saved at age 7. I get baptized at age 8. And then my father, thank the Lord, comes to Jesus when I'm age 10. So it was kind of a roundabout way to get there. And, my whole life, I never doubted God or understanding that we aren't in control of things. But having become saved and you say a prayer and you're going to church, you're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm a good guy. I treat people nice. I'm polite. I try to do the right thing. And so, I spent a lot of time running from God, mainly there were personal things, just growing up, a lot of confusion as an only child with a marriage with my parents that was not good and a family situation that was just not good. And so I spent a lot of time running from God because of that, thinking I'm fine. And if I push the line, but I only push it in certain areas, I'm good. And, at this time, interestingly enough, at age 8, I'm going to church with Susan. We don't know each other. Her parents are running like the children's church things that I'm going to. So we're literally sitting in the same classes, 6, 7, 8, 9, as we're getting older. and never knowing each other until age 14. But I'm ashamed to say the beginnings of COVID brought us to Pastor Jackson at World Outreach Church through her mother watching television. And that got me, his ministry and preaching really punched me in the face as a man spiritually to say, look, you're going through the motions. You are saying one thing, but you are lying to yourself because you're not living it in literally acknowledging Jesus as your Savior, Lord and Savior. Hmm. And so I was in control, right, of of things. And I just had it completely backwards. And so thankfully started getting into the Word. So daily Bible reading, daily prayer, really speaking to God on a daily basis. And lo and behold, it's amazing when you give time to the Father, what he gives to you. And so while we're talking about, something amazingly difficult, it's been quite a beautiful transformation spiritually for Susan and I both, to become even closer, as close as we were as friends and personalities and knowing each other and having a comfort level. Now, because I'm fulfilling more of my obligation, our spiritual lives are at an equal partnership. And so I can't thank God enough for that. It's been amazing.
But to back up just a little bit, Erik was my high school crush.
Oh, boy.
And yeah. We ended up, after graduation, going completely separate directions. We both married different people and really didn't see each other for about 10 years. And we reconnected very, very briefly at our 10-year high school reunion. And I had tagging along with me my little 1-year-old Reilly. So that was the first time Erik actually met her.
Yep.
And then another 10 years passed, and we had both gone through divorces, and we had the 20th high school reunion. And that's where a little romance kind of began to rekindle. And
I found brains I never knew I had. So I've gotten a lot smarter as I've gotten older. So my autobiography would be second chances. And so with a second chance to not be an idiot, I pursued what I should have pursued a long, long time ago. So it's a funny story. And even in that, and with relating to Reilly, we dated, and this is just me trying to overcome years of things that, because I wasn't in the Word and functioning as a real Christian, there was a lot of personal confusion in my life, in my personal life. And that led me, I loved Susan and I wanted to date her, but I could not take that next step of being a husband, and much less taking on the importance of, wow, there's children now, right? And so now you're going to be a dad, which I never thought would happen. And so I really took my time and just dealing with that. And so we dated for 8 years in a proper way, but I was always around the kids. I would come home after work and we would have basically family dinners while we were dating. And so that, between seeing Reilly for the first time at a 10-year reunion, and then now we're dating and we're in the end of junior high school and then beginning high school, it was just interesting how that bond came together, but how our relationship has grown for Susan and I. Then eventually finally getting married, and 7 years now, which is wonderful.
I just love that story. When y'all told that at the retreat, I was like, that is just the neatest story. Such a beautiful romance, that just kind of came out of nowhere. Yeah. And it's just beautiful to see you all together and know that God put you together.
Yes, it's so clearly his redemption in the brokenness of both of our lives through the pain of divorce.
Yes, and amen.
He redeemed that for us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So now we would love to hear about Reilly. take a few minutes and tell us about her. Help us get to know her a little bit.
Well, Reilly was my firstborn redheaded little girl. And I remember as soon as I announced that I was expecting, my sweet daddy said, I'm going to start praying for a redhead. And he got it. And Reilly was so graceful. She was so elegant. She had such an amazing imagination. I just saw it from so early on. She could play and pretend and imagine things and entertain herself for hours at a time. She loved to read books. I could not take books away from her. Honestly, the worst punishment possible was to take a book away from Reilly. That's all it took.
I love that.
She was artistic, very talented, drawing, painting, writing, creating. She was a little bit clumsy like her mama. She came by it rightfully, but she pushed through that. She learned how to surf, and she learned soccer, began to coach a soccer team of children. And she just loved people. She loved to travel. She was loyal. She was protective. She was such a good friend. One of her passions as she graduated from high school and into college, she and a friend who actually was her former high school art teacher, the two of them created a business called Raga Wedding, and they started making all kinds of wedding decor, from baskets and ring bearer pillows and crowns and
Silk
headbands.
flowers.
And she'd hand make these flowers, each petal out of fabric. And it started at our kitchen table.
Yep.
And grew and until they actually moved to the coast of Florida, lived on the beach, had their own office, and the business is absolutely thriving. And Reilly's little sister now is part of that company as well. So it's been a blessing to see the Lord just continue what Reilly started.
She was ferocious she's driven and was going to succeed. And she worked so hard. She had a little bit of learning disabilities. So high school and college, what might take a typical student maybe an hour, she was willing for it to take 2, 3, or 4 hours. And she was going to get that A. And actually, one of the most interesting things, we would sit around the dinner table sometimes with projects that she's working on, and then she's gotten a result. And this was a girl. If it was a 96, we've got tears. and I was like, Reilly, it's okay. We love you. It doesn't matter. If it was an 80s, no, it's got to be 100. She was just so driven just to do things properly to her standard. And, that served her so well, because she was fearless to try different things. She had, in addition to surfing, she had started, again, she was not athletic at all, but, and with a pacemaker, here she was surfing and started skateboarding again. And so, it was just incredible to see what she was willing to try. And she was just hitting her stride, really. It was good to see where she was, and just beautiful, and just an absolute joy.
How old was she when she started that business?
She was she in high school or
yes, it was the
finishing high school,
junior/senior year, between junior and senior year of high school. I'd come home after work. There were just flowers, putting together silk flowers on the table, like actually the same table we're speaking here. And they would do these orders, put it in boxes, and then they'd get shipped from our front porch, have them picked up and delivered to Europe. They were delivering stuff to Germany, Czechoslovakia. It was just
all over
wild,
the world.
England, just all over. And it was great to see that rub off on Renna, but also Reed, because all the kids want to have their own businesses, and they all have talent to do that.
Yeah.
And so it was fun to see that, and be there, and just offer advice if there were bad days of particular logistical issues. She'd ask a question, give her just business advice, and just 2 cents, and let her run with it. And it was fun to see and have her overcome her own insecurities of speaking to other people and that kind of stuff. So it was, it was fun to see.
It's amazing to see that kind of entrepreneurial spirit in someone so young, and not just the desire to do it, but actually the follow through and to make it happen and to be successful with it is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'll relate this to my dad. Was an artist, and my dad had a very tough upbringing, and he had an amazing artistic talent that allowed him to escape that tough upbringing and help him deal with that. And I think God blessed Reilly, because in Susan's first marriage there were very difficult things with her ex, and Reilly bore the brunt of that as the oldest child for the most part. And I think the ability to read and have the imagination to take yourself to a different place, but also then have the artistic ability to create, allowed her to channel whatever inner frustrations she may have had, because she's very private. What she wouldn't want to share with us could come out in creating beautiful things. And so it's just so good at it.
Yeah, it's just a gift that God gave her. Now, Riley is an unusual name. How did you choose that name for her?
Well, actually, quite some time before I was even expecting a child, I was watching a TV show, and as the credits scrolled at the end, I saw the name Reilly, and it literally just felt like it jumped off the screen at me. And I knew from that very second, if I ever had a little girl, that I would name her Reilly. So a couple years later, when I found out that little girl was on the way, there was no question what her name would be. And I remember telling my sweet little granny that her name was going to be Reilly. And Granny was so upset because she said, Reilly is a boy's name, and you cannot name a girl Reilly. But we worked through that, and we did name her Reilly Page. And Reilly actually means valiant, brave, and courageous. And that was Reilly. And the Lord knew exactly who she would become before he even created her.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, she was perfectly named. I agree. So your story with Riley begins even before she was born. Talk about that.
Well, when I was 6 months into the pregnancy, everything seemed to be going well. I was healthy. Everything had been wonderful. I went to just a regular checkup with the doctor, and in the ultrasound, they heard what sounded like an unusual heartbeat that sounded different than it had previously. So my OB was very calm, gentle, sweet Christian lady. She said, don't panic. I want you to go to the hospital. I just want another set of eyes on this. And let's just take a look. And at that appointment, that same afternoon, it was discovered that Reilly had a complete heart block. I'd never heard of that condition. The specialist that was reading the ultrasound had never seen that condition. He said, oh, I've read about this, so that's what it looks like. So we were in very uncharted territory for all of us, but Reilly was healthy in every way except her heartbeat was half of what it should be. The little AV node in the middle of her heart that regulated the rhythm had been damaged. And so that began several months of regular monitoring, regular testing. I would see a pediatric cardiologist. I would see a maternal fetal specialist. and they would just monitor things. The rest of the pregnancy went fairly well. And the doctor said, well, as long as she's inside you, she's just fine. We don't know what's going to happen when she was born. But our church gathered around me, friends began to pray. I just knew I had so much prayer covering through those few months. And when it was time for Reilly to be born on July 22nd of 1998, she was perfect with a slow heart rate. And the Lord just lined up so many sweet things during her birth. The nurse in the NICU was a friend. I didn't even know she was a nurse, but she was there, and she was the first person to take Reilly out of the doctor's hands. And Reilly honestly did so well in those early days in the hospital. We were only there a few days. They sent us home together. She was just beautiful and perfect in so many ways. And we would have regular doctor's checkups. We had a specialist, a cardiologist, and every time we went, we got a good report until she was about close to 5 years old. And the doctor said, okay, I think it's time. She's doing well, but I think it's time that we put in a pacemaker. That's pretty much going to cure this problem for her. She'll have a pacemaker for the rest of her life, but that should take care of things. That'll regulate her heart rate and she'll be fine. So 5 years old, we had that surgery. She recovered well. We went through her teenage years. She had to have a second pacemaker put in about 7 years later because the batteries wear out. That was a very uneventful operation, quick outpatient thing. She went home the same day, did very well. And with each new pacemaker, the technology improved. And so they lasted longer. The second one lasted considerably longer than the first. So things were going very well. We were getting close to the point Reilly would need that pacemaker replaced, but we had a thumbs up, good news from every person on our medical team, and we were just moving right along.
Yeah. Now, Eric, you and Reilly had a really special relationship. And I know you didn't have any children of your own coming into this marriage. So talk about that.
Yeah, correct. I went through cancer treatment when I was 24 years old. That cancer treatment, the nature of the disease, and then my stem cell transplant for Hodgkin's disease, all of that together made it impossible for me to have children of my own. So when I had an opportunity to start dating Susan again, understanding, wow, there's 3 little ones, that was part of the math I'm doing in my head. Is I never, having previously been, married and with discussions of adoption, I was like, no, absolutely not. I'm not doing it. I'm not that guy. I'm not. And that's just how foolish I was. But now dating Susan, meeting these kids, and this just amazing meeting them actually in reverse order. I met Renna first, then Reed, and then Reilly. But as I meet them and as we are spending time together, there's 3 amazing kids. And I'm like, what did these kids ever do to deserve where they are right now? It's like, how could you, as I'm just thinking about how bad Susan's ex was, I'm like, how in the world could you ignore these kids? They're just wonderful. So now that's the challenge to me as we're dating. Can you finally be a man for the first time in your life and really step up to be an adult and have a family and take care of a family? So that internal battle was going on. And the more I was with them, the answer was just became more and more yes. And it was only my own fear that kept me from it for so long. But I was keenly aware with Reilly in all of the interactions. Renna was more outgoing. Reed was subdued, but being a young boy, I could still connect with him. Reilly was nice. She was intrigued by this new friend, but mommy is mommy, and it's my mommy. And she was very, I don't want to say standoffish, but she was skeptical, okay, and rightfully so, as things are going on. And so I realized this. So I worked very hard internally in my interactions. I was focused on her more than the others because I knew the mountain that I had to climb there. And so to speak. And so, what started off as a peek behind the back of a Honda Odyssey in the parking lot, as she's peeking around the back and I'm peeking around the back to saying, "Oh, hi, Reilly," to then now we're going places, we're taking day trips and going places, we're going to the beach and getting them to go out into the water. Oh, because we're not going to go out. I'm getting them out into the deep end for the first time and getting them swimming and all this stuff. It was just fun to let that naturally, organically improve and take shape. And it was just such a joy over that time to really earn her trust. And for me personally, and I think I said this in our group, but for me, it's the biggest thrill of my life, was earning that trust from her and being accepted as dad when I didn't think I had it in me and I never thought it would happen.
Yeah.
And so to get that from the three, and I'll read it real quick. This is a Christmas card, the Christmas before we got married. So this is 2017. And of course, there's notes. This is from all the kids. And Reilly writes, "Erik, you have brought laughter and adventure and so much joy into this family. And I can't imagine it without you. Have a very Merry Christmas. Lots of love, Reilly." And, that's where we ended up. And now, then after getting married and really having her, she just melt my heart by saying, "Dad." She'd come home from, because she moved to Palm Coast with the business, and she'd come home, "Dad, I need gas in my car," or whatever it is. "Dad, could you show me," whatever it is. I would just hear that, and it didn't matter what it is. I'd be yes. And just the most wonderful hugs, and just to kiss that red hair on her head was just a joy. And in fact, it was Reilly who gave me permission. I mean, I had known Bob and Dixie. I'd known Susan's parents for quite some time. But when we were going to get married, I was going to ask them. Okay. And at this time, Bob is not doing well. He's sick. But I went over and I asked both the parents, "Hey, I would like permission. I'd like to marry your daughter." And that was just a wonderful conversation. But I also knew, okay, we've got 3 little ones. And so I'm like, you know what? We're just going to go to lunch. So I took Reilly to lunch, just her. And I said, "Look, I've got an idea." I said, "I'm going to tell you, and you don't have to answer now. Okay. But your answer is it, because this is a big thing." So I told her, I said, "Look, I've known your mom for a long time, and I've loved your mom for a long time. And I was stupid enough not to date your mom when we were in high school and then me get married." I said, "But I said, I want to marry mommy, and I want to adopt you and Reed and Rena." And I said, I said, "Shoot me straight." I said, "I'm Italian and I'm Scottish." And we had determined in a lot of our family dinners, we would just talk about being direct and transparent. And so I said, "So, you just let me know. Tell me, what are your thoughts?" And she didn't say anything, but she just got this gigantic smile from across the table. And I said, "Do you think this is a good idea?" And she just smiled and said yes, and had tears in her eyes. And she said, "Yes, yes, definitely yes." And then it was, "What took you so long, you moron?" So honesty is wonderful. So it was just great to get that from her and know that she was at peace with it. Reilly knew that I loved her. She knew I would protect her from just other things that had gone on before we had gotten married. And so she knew she could trust me, and that just made all the difference. And so when she moved out, we didn't talk a lot, frequently, but when we did, it was just very good conversations. And she always would, make sure that I knew that she loved me. I gave her a necklace. When we got married, I gave the girls a necklace, and I gave Reed, or actually Reed got dog tags. And of course, I know it so well, and I'm going to forget it.
Love made us family.
That's right. Love made us family.
No, marriage made us family, but love makes you my daughter.
That's right. That's right. And so Reed got that on dog tags, and then girls got that on the necklace. And she never took it off. She never took it off. She died with it on. Mm-hmm. And that's how close it was. I had experienced something. She gave to me that gift that I never, ever dreamed of having. And so God it's kind of counterintuitive. And this is the witness to all of our unsaved friends, but God was so good to me in this. Reilly was an absolute gift. It was a gift that I needed for me personally, for my own salvation. So I was very thankful for the relationship that we had.
Yeah. I just love your family story. I just think it's so beautiful. So thank you for sharing it with us. So talk about what happened in January of 2023.
To back up just a month before that time, Reilly and I had gone to her cardiologist for a checkup. She got a glowing report. The last thing he said to us was, Reilly, there's no reason to think you will not live a long, healthy life. You can do anything any normal person can do. You can have children, you can travel, you can ride roller coasters, you can surf, whatever you want to do. You are healthy and you will live a long life. So we went through the holidays that year with that wonderful report, and it was such a good, uplifting, positive time for us. Yeah. But on the morning of January 31st of 2023, Eric and I started our morning with a bike ride pretty early in the morning. We were trying to be healthy, and when we got home, we typically had some coffee. I'd take my Bible and go sit in the backyard and spend some time in the Word and prayer. And that morning, I just had an uneasiness in my spirit. That's the only way I know how to describe it. I just kept thinking about Reilly. I was concerned about her. I checked her location. We share and follow locations on our phones. I checked her location. She was at home. I knew she had gone on a little short girls' weekend trip out of town. I knew she had made it safely home the day before. She was supposed to be at work, so I kept checking her location, and she was still at home. And I thought, well, maybe she has the day off. And I kept checking, and I'd mention it to Eric. I'd say, Reilly's still at home. She should be at work. And he said, oh, don't worry about her. You know, tomorrow is your birthday, and she's going to come visit you. So she'll be all right. And I kept thinking I should call her, but I'm going to see her tomorrow. And I didn't call her, but I kept checking, and she was still at home all morning. So we continued on through our day. About lunchtime, Eric and I sat down at our kitchen table and had right where we're talking to you right now, and we were eating lunch. And Eric, my back was toward the front of the house, but Eric could see that a car came and parked in front of our house, what looked like a police officer, and then the doorbell rang. I assumed it was a solicitor, and Eric went to the door, and I heard a man asking for me. So I took off to the front door, and the officer asked if he could come in, and he said, do you have a daughter named Reilly? And I said, yes, and she's at her house. I know exactly where she is. And he proceeded to inform us that she had passed away. We had no details. We just were stunned beyond belief. The officer really didn't have much information for us other than to give us a phone number of an officer on the scene with her 2 hours away. I tried calling some friends who lived close to Reilly, couldn't get an answer. We were just stunned.
Well, the obvious, I mean, again, it's right out of the movies that you see 1,000 times, getting that kind of news. So Susan, obviously shaken and crying. Rena was in her room, and mommy's now has to tell Rena what's happening. And so now I'm given a card, call the officer with the Flagler County Sheriff's Department. And so now I have to pay attention to things that 30 seconds ago would have never been in, just in a nightmare. And now I'm on the phone with Flagler County with their officer explaining what had happened. And so Reilly was getting dressed to go to work, and she had a final thought in her head and literally fell out on her feet because her heart rate was suddenly rocketed to over 400 beats a minute to it instantly just seizes, and she's dead on her feet. And the mercy in that is it's not painful. She's gone in an instant, but now, you have her roommate who finds her. This happens at 9 o'clock ish in the morning. Her roommate is getting up, sees the door is still closed when Reilly should be at work, and is thinking, oh, wow. So goes back to bed, gets back up again. So her roommate finds her. Unfortunately, the girl that she went with on the trip, the other two girls in the house were already at work. And so now poor Heather finds her, tries to do CPR, tries to resuscitate her, calls 911. They try to revive her and cannot. And now that's a whirlwind of sheriff investigators, coroners, and that was the beginning, honestly, of a much longer road for us trying to get answers, autopsies, things of that nature. Flagler County thought it was just normal that a 24-year-old girl should just die on her feet. So it was ruled natural causes. And so we had to battle Flagler County coroner's office, and eventually ended up having to pay for an autopsy with the University of Florida, all to try to find some answers. 30 days previous, we're told she's going to live a wonderful long life and finally have children. She was dating a guy who, in this time, I mean, it's out of a Hallmark movie. If you really wanted a gut punch, besides the parents, to the guy she was marrying, nice young man, they had split up. Reilly went on this trip. While she's on the trip, this young man comes to his senses and realizes he wants to spend the rest of his life with Reilly, and he proceeds to write this beautiful letter basically to Reilly while she's at this trip, with plans to give it to her when she comes back.
Wow.
And now they were going to see each other on a Tuesday or Wednesday when she's back, or on a Wednesday when she's back, and she dies Tuesday morning. And so, as you know, your world is completely upside down. But the frustrating part for us, and one of the difficult things as we deal with, we talk about later, is why? I mean, it's the ultimate question, but a completely healthy girl, and then just all of a sudden gone. And when she had a device that was supposed to keep her alive. And so these questions, are the most difficult ones. So in an instant, we had planned to see her for Susan's birthday. So in that instant, your life is just upside down, and nothing makes sense. But yet in that aftermath, having to try to keep it together, to ask right questions and keep people on task was a very difficult task, dealing with county governments and other things like that. So it was a very frustrating process after the fact, as kind of insult to injury. That just honestly, I, I grew up liking comedy, and if you were doing dark comedy things, some of the things we had to deal with were just incredibly unique.
And we honestly still don't have a complete
Right.
answer to what happened. Our best guess is the pacemaker malfunctioned and just in an instant skyrocketed her heart rate, and with no warning whatsoever for any of us, she was with the Lord.
You know, our stories are so different in that in our situation, Hannah had cancer. And so we walked out this year-long journey with her, and we knew that unless God intervened with a miracle, that she would most likely be going to heaven. With you guys, you had just been told a month earlier that everything was great, that Reilly was going to live a long and normal life. And I'm sure you guys were excited about that and thinking about the future and making plans. And now all of a sudden, a police officer shows up at your door with news that is absolutely unthinkable. What were your conversations with God like at that point?
Well, I imagine that my conversations were probably very different than Eric's. I remember the just complete and absolute shock, just the deep disbelief that it couldn't possibly be that Reilly was gone. And for a while, the only thing I could say over and over was Jesus, 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 Jesus. And I remember telling the police officer before he left us that day that we were going to be okay because we knew the Lord. I don't know why that even came out of my mouth, but it did. So even in that moment of just feeling so completely shattered, I knew that there was no help for me apart from the Lord. So later, as the questions started to come and my mind began to work through that, our new reality, I always had such a deep sense of thankfulness for my relationship with the Lord. And I knew he was the one to whom I had to cling through all of it.
It was just the disbelief that she's gone. And to be honest, I had more anger, not at God, but from the medical system in general. I've been through cancer treatment, stem cell transplant survivor, and that treatment that saved my life when I was 24 almost killed me. It gave me a heart attack, so I almost died from it as a side effect years later. So just being fully aware of just medical systems in general and lack of just many things, I can accept that God is in control. I wasn't angry at God, but I was mad that I had adults on the other end of a telephone with a straight face tell me that this was normal. Mm. And so the Italian and Scottish in me was throttling people with a telephone, having any conversation I could to get to the bottom of this. Our daughter, my treasure, is gone, and you tell me it's normal. That will not suffice. I was not going to take that. Honestly, I can look at the sky and take it from God and say, yes, there's a plan here that I don't know and understand. But to have a human tell me that it was perfectly normal that my daughter is dead now, I couldn't take. And so I was just on a warpath to get answers. And, that led us to do some interrogation reports, post-mortem, before an autopsy. That led us into some difficult things to have to do as parents. And just as a sidebar, if people don't understand that there's different types of pacemakers, but nonetheless, they all keep a record of what's going on. And the report of that is called an interrogation report. And it's literally just an electronic, you hook it up to a machine. Reilly would do it remotely. So with the internet connection, they would know exactly what's going on with that device. And in an effort to get answers and to have an autopsy, go down that road, we had to do a post-mortem pacer check. So now Susan and I have to go to the funeral home and physically on Reilly's body do that while just to her body. And it takes an internet connection. Well, in the middle of a funeral home, in the middle of nowhere in North Florida, there's no internet connection. So we're having to literally wheel her around a facility to go to a storage room, to get to an external window, to get signal, to do an interrogation report. So all of these things just one after another, like the devil was just laughing at us. And so I was so wanting answers, but it was just difficult to go through that process and keep your sanity, to be honest with you. But in an interesting way, I've never been closer to God. And it is, as a transition, this brought this whole process for me personally. I just understood my faith became even more real, because without it, how do you get through? Right. And I was just in my head, I've known friends of mine who have lost children who aren't saved. And I know what has happened to their marriages and what has happened to them personally. Drug abuse, alcohol abuse, other things, cheating on husbands and wives, that kind of stuff. And I was like, no, the devil is not winning. We're not going down that road. For me personally, I was like, I've worked so hard to get my soul in the correct place. I'm not giving it back because of this. And so it really galvanized my relationship with Christ in the most dire of circumstances. But at times it was hard to maintain my Christianity in dealing with particular people. So, but we have pushed through that, but it was difficult.
Yeah, I can just imagine. And eventually, I suppose you just have to come to terms with not knowing the answers and accept that to be able to move forward with life. This concludes the first half of my conversation with Erik and Susan Totera. Be sure to come back next week as we get deeper into their story and they share how God has been working in their lives since Reilly went to heaven ahead of them. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.